I've had more than 3 hours sleep, but I don't think that's going to make mine any better. I don't like going at the end either because Mark did a great job, Kirk did a great job, and that's one of the things. I don't mind speaking every Sunday, but I enjoy it when others speak because I think you get a different view on the same material. You get a different perspective, and so I enjoy it when we have the speakers like we had today. You know, no matter where we go, someone is trying to sell us something. I don't know about you, but have you ever been sitting at the TV late at night and an infomercial pops up? And what they're doing is they're saying, I've tried this product and it is the best product that I've ever used. It has changed my life. And that's why when a few days later things show up in the mail like the Ninja Blender that my wife ordered at late night infomercial. I'm sure she's ordered all kinds of other things, but she probably intercepts them before I get the chance to see them because she knows what I'm going to say. But one of the most effective ways to convince someone that you believe in something is personal testimony, isn't it? It's by saying, this works for me, and I think it should work for you as well. It's especially true for diet ads and face cream, isn't it? You've all seen these kinds of things. There's always a before picture, and then there's an after picture. And there's a huge difference. You look at the product and you have to say, wow, what an amazing product to turn that person into that person. Until you read the little things at the bottom. And what does it always say? Results not typical, doesn't it? Results not typical. Unfortunately, we struggle with some of the same ideas and the same concept in the Christian community. We have a tendency when somebody comes into our group we have 40 people here this morning, but we choose one or two people and we say, look at them. Look at how much becoming a Christian has changed the way that they live. Used to, they were on the streets, they were drug addicts, or whatever it is. We say, look at them and look at the process of change. But do we sometimes need to do the same thing and put a little banner above their head and say, results not typical? Don't we struggle with the same thing? We look at people and we say, or we tell to people, look at what Jesus can do for you. And then we have to say results not typical. If that's the case, then how are we different than a diet company? How are we different than an exercise company? Or any of the others? A changed life is what all of us are supposed to present to the world. But unfortunately, we live in a society where people are jaded. People look to us, and unless they actually see change in our lives, they're not going to believe it. People are fed up with empty claims. And so as the church, we need to make sure that we can say results are typical. When Jesus comes into our lives, there is change. And we need to be able to show that. For almost 2 months, we've been talking about transformation. We've been asking, are you transformed? Are you in the process of being transformed? Am I? I want us to spend just a couple of minutes this morning looking at Acts chapter 9. Because here in Acts chapter 9, Paul had just been on the road to Damascus. Paul had had an encounter with Jesus. And there was a transformation that happened. That transformation was amazing. In Acts chapter 20 and verse 9, immediately he preached the Christ in the synagogues, that he is the Son of God. Now I want us to think about this for a moment. Paul the week before had been out trying to round up Christians to persecute them or to kill them. And now this week he's in the synagogue preaching. That is quite a transformation. A deep change happened in his life. And it's the kind of change that all of us should expect when we're truly serving God. When we filter everything when we filter everything else, my brain is broken today, sorry. When we filter out everything that we think of as Christianity in the 21st century and get down to just the basics, what it comes down to is Jesus changed lives. God changes lives. If we say we're a Christian today, but there is not evidence of a changed life, people are not going to believe us. Take a look at verse 21. All those who heard were astonished and asked, Isn't he the man who raised havoc in Jerusalem among those who called on his name? All of those who heard him, who were there listening, were surprised. They said, isn't this the same man who came up here to kill these people, to persecute them? And now he's among them and he's preaching? What in the world is going on? Paul's friends are baffled by his change. The people that once surrounded him, the people that knew Paul the best, now look at him and they say, who is this man? This is not the man that we used to know. Unfortunately, the same is not often true of us. I've told the story before, but I'll tell you again. One time after high school, I ran into a friend in a store. And we were talking about occupations, and I told him I was preaching, and he just looked at me kind of funny. And he said, didn't we cheat on that biology test together? I still know the answers, AAA, DC, ACB. So if you ever need those answers, I still know those answers. But that's not what the people around Paul saw. They saw a man who was different at one time, and then the next day, literally the next day, he was different. He was transformed. If we really want to be the marbles that Mark mentioned this morning, we have to be able to say that our results are typical. We have to be able to say when Christ comes into our lives, there is change. Notice something else that can be seen. Starting in verse 23. Now after many days were passed, the Jews plotted to kill him. But their plot became known to Saul, and they watched the gates day and night to kill him. Verse 25. Then the disciples took him by night and let him down through the wall in a large basket. The next thing that happens, or that should happen if we're transformed, is that we don't just baffle our friends, but we start to get reactions from those around us because we're different than them. What I think is fascinating, though, about this story is that the people Paul was after one day, very shortly, were willing to give their lives for him. Would they have done that if they had not seen an amazing transformation in his life? Wayne Lawson writes this. He says, we cannot go through a change and say we are now saved and on the Lord's side and have no desire to hang out at church. He said alcoholics hang out at the bar, drug addicts hang out at the dope house, gamblers hang out at the casino, movie buffs hang out at the theater, dancers hang out at the club, singers hang out in the studio, bodybuilders hang out in the gym. Saints ought to hang out in the church. As Christians, we should expect a changed life. We should expect a transformed life. We're following a new master, letting God change us in new ways. Most of the time when we talk about transformation, we think about that person before they become a Christian, and now they became a Christian. And so a lot of us who have been Christians for years say, okay, what about me? How does transformation apply to me? And maybe the results are not as dramatic, but we should be able to look, or I should be able to look at the lives of everyone here, and you should be able to look at my life and say, how different is it from those who do not know Christ? And there should be a difference. When we look at those diet ads, when we look at those face cream ads, don't we look and say, okay, obviously the transformation was real, but what happens in 3 years? What happens in 5 years? One time, I went on a diet and I weighed 190 pounds. 2 years later, you could have looked at me and said, yes, he's done a good job. 3 years later, you would have seen this. What about that transformation in our lives? What do we see 3 to 5 years later? Are we still different? Because if we're not still different, then Christ hasn't really transformed us. I don't know about you, but I have a tendency to look and say, but why are people looking at me anyway? People have the right to look at our lives, though. We can't go around and say, I'm a Christian. and not expect people to look at our lives. It doesn't work that way. Part of our witness is a changed life. So what do people see when they come and look at our lives? When someone looks at our family, what do they see? I remember one time there was a preacher who I respected, and I went over to his house for dinner. And sitting around the dinner table was an eye-opening experience. You know, at church, they were calm and polite and thoughtful to one another. Just the little perfect ideal family that you would expect at church. But at home, they yelled and screamed at one another. Life was a different place at home than it was at church. What do people see in our family lives? What do people see when they get into the workplace? The decisions that you make on a daily basis, are they decisions that honor Christ? What do people see when we're on our leisure time, when Kirk is out fishing and he sticks the fish hook through his finger? Not that he would ever do that. But what do people see? Or when you're out on the golf course and you hit the golf ball and you happen to hit another house. Not that I've ever done that. But what do people see? What do people think? When we have Christ in our lives, if we have Him in our lives in the right way, we cannot help but have changed lives. Are we going to be the kind of church that points to one or two Christians that has little banners over their head that says results not typical? Or are we going to be the kind of church that can say, come in and look at the lives of anyone? We're not perfect, but our lives are transformed by Christ. That's our goal. And in our Wednesday study, we'll talk about a couple of practical things that we can do to move closer to that goal. Now, I don't know about you, but I've had a good day today. We've tried to keep our lessons a little shorter so we can have a normal afternoon. Mark talked to us about transformational surgery. I'm a sucker for good illustrations, and I wrote notes so I would remember what he talked about. But you know what sticks out in my mind are cotton balls and marbles. It's a great illustration, isn't it? Now there's no baby sleeping anymore. Sorry, Kirsten. Kirk talked to us about extended transformation. Every day is a journey. Every day we take God's word. We bring it to those who are around us. And sometimes it takes different things for each of us to recognize that need for transformation. For Kirk, it took a 2-year-old child to recognize that need for transformation. For some of us, or some of our friends, I'm hoping what it takes is them seeing a transformed life. Them seeing someone who really tries to live a Christian life. Because I want us to be able to say, our results are typical. In the coming weeks, starting the first Sunday in July, we're going to start a new series called Rooted. It kind of takes the concept of transformation and it takes it to the next step. And so I hope that you'll come and be part of that. The next couple of weeks are going to be more free-for-all lessons for me, just to well, that sounds really wrong to say pass the time. For me to teach on some things that I think are important but don't really fit into any series. And so please come in the next couple of weeks, and then in the beginning of July we'll talk about our new series on Rooted. We never want to close without offering an invitation. If there's someone here today who's never given your lives over to Christ, we invite you to do that. Or if you have, but you have sin in your life, you need God's forgiveness, but more than that, you want the support of your brothers and sisters. You want their prayers, their encouragement. We invite you to come forward as we stand and sing number 648. Number 648.